The man who powers 97.3 ESPN.com's Eagles coverage is John McMullen. He's getting ready for tomorrow night's Eagles-Colts game. As we talked yesterday, John, there's a couple guys at the bottom of this roster that have a lot to play for. But, you know, this third preseason game is the one where everybody says, well, what do you want to see and what are you hoping for? You know, I think, if anything, last year's third preseason game taught us we really shouldn't care if they go 3 and out or score 3 times.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably true. Let's be honest. I mean, Jim Schwartz brought up the other day that the only 0-16 team in history, which was the Rod Marinelli Detroit Lions, they won 4-0 in the preseason. So that can tell you what the preseason means. I've heard 2 theories over the years. And one, kind of Dennis Green, who recently passed away, told me, and he said, winning is a habit. And he was trying to change the culture when he arrived in Minnesota. And he believed in trying to win preseason games. And it worked for him. And it did carry over. And he turned that team into a playoff club right away. But it wasn't like he was putting in starters in the fourth quarter.
Right.
He was just trying to win the games with the people he had in there.
Sure. I don't think you discount winning and losing. I just don't know that you can validate your offense scoring or going 3 and out and saying this is a microcosm of what our season might be.
No, of course. And that's what Mark Levy was at the other end of the spectrum, the Hall of Fame coach for Buffalo. He used to use the preseason as something to find the last 4 or 5 players on the back end of his roster. And those Buffalo teams would often get beat 40-7 in the preseason. Indianapolis, more recently, with Peyton Manning, they used to go winless in the preseason all the time because they weren't concerned. They were just trying to find 2 or 3 players that maybe were diamonds in the rough that could help them win a game in the regular season. So you can't take it seriously. You can't get too up. I know everyone's really, really excited about Dak Prescott and the way he's played down in Dallas. And, it's great when a rookie can play and excel early. But, when the real bell rings, it just doesn't mean that much. And never was that more clear. Week 3 of the preseason last year at Green Bay, Sam Bradford, perfect. Everybody thought the Eagles were going to the Super Bowl. It's not reality.
I thought McManus over at ESPN.com wrote an interesting piece. He had an interesting take on it, that here's a guy last year that realistically was not 100% healthy, and yet the expectations were through the roof. And I think that's a product of the other moves they made, Kiko and Byron Maxwell and Murray, more so than Bradford, but he was a part of it. The game that he played, I think, added to that whole thing. But they were already a team that people thought was going to be, they won 10 games the year before. They added a lot of talent, so people were excited. But this year, here's a guy who's healthy, and yet the expectations are low, as opposed to last year, a guy who was nowhere near as healthy as he is now.
Yeah, that's true. And the expectations were off the charts, and now they're very, very low. And Sam is healthy. He's had a complete off season for the first time in years, and he's much more prepared to go into this season. And on top of that, he's playing in an offense he enjoys more because he's got some autonomy at the line of scrimmage. So the dichotomy there doesn't make a lot of sense. And really what it comes down to is that people in this city for a long time believed in Chip Kelly, no questions asked. And that sort of optimism came from the head coach. And they don't believe in Doug Peterson for whatever reason. I think that's unfair. I've talked about it on this show. But I think it all stems from that. I don't think it stems from Sam. In fact, from a logic standpoint, Sam is more prepared, as I said, to go into this season, certainly more than last season, and perform well. But people just don't believe in the coach of this football team, and they bought hook, line, and sinker what Chip Kelly was selling.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Let me ask you about Sam. Seemed like a different guy, people gravitating to him more. We know what happened with the whole contract thing and he wanted to be traded? I mean, does that seem like it was completely like years ago? How is Sam received this training camp?
Yeah, I mean, that does seem like it was years ago, and I never thought anybody in the locker room would hold that against Sam when he walked away for the few days that he did. First, it was voluntary work. Second, everybody understood why he was upset. And players in general don't like to get involved with other players' contract issues because if a similar situation happens to them, they don't want another player talking out of school. So it doesn't surprise me that the players, it didn't mean much to them. It meant more to the casual fan, the general public. So that part of it is long past what it once was. And hey, as I said, he's healthy. He's far more confident in the knee because in a lot of ways, Mike, the mental hurdle from 2 straight ACLs is bigger than the physical hurdle. And the fact that you come back, you do all the rehab once, you get back on the field, and it happens again. I mean, that's just incredibly difficult to deal with. And there's no doubt in the back of Sam's mind, he was questioning whether his knee would hold up last season. Now he's farther off it. For the most part, he was healthy. He only missed 2 games last season that had nothing to do with the knee, so he feels a lot more confident physically.
Got to be, right? I mean, you think about missing almost a year and a half, and I know it was like, okay, you've played 5-6 games, you should, but I mean, realistically, I don't know that it was fair at any point last season. Last half of the year he played very well, but it's hard to even imagine that, mentally until late in that year that he felt like, all right, I'm past this, I can let it rip.
Yeah, I agree with that completely, and he's talked about that constantly throughout the spring and summer, what it means to have that off season. The one issue, though, Sam is Sam, and he's not a very vocal guy. He's not the rah-rah guy. He's not the guy that's going to be Dan Marino screaming on the sidelines. So if you're looking for that type of leadership, you're not going to find it. That's just not his personality. That's just not the type of guy he is. But if he wins football games early in this season, people will follow him. He's the leader of this team on the field for now.
He was recently ranked by GMs and polls and yada, 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 Sandos thing. He was like, 28 out of 32, which, I guess, look, if you told me he was 18, 28, 25, I think those guys in those ranges are very interchangeable. I guess you wonder if he's a guy, he's been criticized by Norman. He's 28th in that poll. Is he a guy, he doesn't wear it on his sleeve, but do you think that kind of stuff, that he knows it, that he bothers him, that people don't think much of him, a guy who was the number 1 overall pick, a guy who, let's be honest, has been disappointing? Do you think that eats at him at all?
I think it does, but I think at this point he tries to stay away from as much media, so it wouldn't surprise me if he never even came across those ratings. He doesn't get into social media, doesn't read the websites or the newspapers, and he tries to stay away from that stuff. But certainly he understands by the questions he gets. This was once a guy who was the number 1 pick in the entire draft. This was a guy who was supposed to be Carson Wentz for the St. Louis Rams. He was the guy. He was the face of the franchise. He was going to be an all-pro level player for a decade, and it didn't work out. So he understands the difference between where he was early in his career and where he is now, which is basically a lame duck. He would have to be completely clueless not to understand that. And he's a smart guy, and he does realize it. Unfortunately for him, though, I mean, his resume is what his resume is. And we talk about it all the time. It's a chicken and egg theory. No, he's never had great receivers in St. Louis. He certainly doesn't have great receivers now. But the truly great quarterbacks, and put any name you want out there, most notably Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady over the years, you take Randy Moss away from that small sample size in New England. What has Tom Brady had at the receiver position?
Mm-hmm.
Aaron Rodgers.
Well, I think that's, John, I think that's where – I think you just said something that I think it's sometimes that fans have a hard time with, is that you can't expect your quarterback to be Tom Brady because that guy doesn't exist. There's only so many guys that will ever play at that level. If I said Sam Bradford's the quarterback of the Bengals are still pretty good because he's got A.J. Green and he's got – if Andy Dalton's the quarterback of the Eagles, I don't think the Eagles' expectations are any different.
Yeah, that's probably fair. I would say Andy because of his youth and he hasn't been as banged up physically, would probably have a slightly higher upside, but not much. And you're right, but the difference is Andy Dalton was a second-round pick. Sam Bradford was once the number one pick in the draft.
Sure.
He was supposed to be an elite-level quarterback. That never developed, obviously, and that's why it's fair when you compare somebody who was supposed to be one of those top-tier quarterbacks to the top-tier quarterbacks because he never turned into one. And why I bring up those names is for the simple reason that they elevate the talent around them. And nobody did it better than Aaron Rodgers last year when Jordy Nelson went down. All of a sudden, Jeff Janis looks like a superstar in the playoffs. I mean, that's the kind of player he is. Granted, it's unfair to compare anybody to Aaron Rodgers. But at one point, that's what Sam Bradford was supposed to be. Obviously, we're long past that point. He's not that type of quarterback. He's not going to elevate Nelson Aguilar. He's not going to elevate Josh Huff. And they're not very good players. So I think that is more the point I'm trying to get at.
So that being said, is it fair to think that Bradford can have a good year with what he's got around him, or is he basically set up to fail with this group?
I think it's going to be tough statistically. I think I mentioned earlier in the week, the Eagles have to win games in a different fashion. They have to win the 2014, the 2017 game. They're not going to win games by scoring 34 points. He just doesn't have enough talent around him to start throwing the football all over the yard for 4,500 over a season with 35 touchdowns. Unless Dorial Green-Beckham turns into Randy Moss. And, stranger things have happened. He's got the skill set. Maybe the light goes off. Maybe he turns into a superstar, but I doubt it. And if you look at the other receivers on this team, they're just not equipped to win sort of basketball on turf games. So the Eagles have to go about it in a different way, and they have to take advantage of what they have on defense with Jim Schwartz and a lot of good players, a good special teams unit under Dave Sipp, and they got to win games that way and sort of manage things offensively.
There's a lot of teams that have been successful using a defense and just kind of trying to, limit mistakes on offense. Andy's teams did that a lot, but they had a quarterback in McNabb that was able to create plays and make plays by himself. Not sure that the Eagles, because let's be honest, Andy didn't have great wideouts, save for the Owens year. There wasn't a lot of wideout talent on those teams either. That was McNabb making some plays by himself, led by a very good defense. Not a Super Bowl level defense, but a pretty good defense and a underwhelming talent offense. Now they had good offensive lines on those Reed teams, but they didn't run the ball all that much. I mean, remember we used to be pulling our hair out at why don't they run the ball more? But there is a recipe to win without having an elite talent on offense.
Oh, sure. We've seen it most recently with Seattle. But you hit on something when you said that. When you talked about Mike Sando's ratings, and the fact that when he polled people around this league, Sam came in 28th. The reason for that is because of what you just said. He can't extend plays. In today's NFL, you have to do that because nobody's going to have a clean pocket. And at times, you're going to have to make something happen when things break down.
Can I ask you? Can I ask you this then? On that note, does Bradford seem more is athletic the right word? Does he seem more mobile this year as opposed to last year because of being a year removed?
Yeah, and in fact, he had that little run for only 1 yard, but it shows you he's more willing to move around a little bit. Obviously, he's not going to be a guy who's going to take 10 or 15 yards at a chunk out of you, but he is more willing. He is more confident to sort of try to move a little bit, slide out of the pocket, and try to do things that way. He's more confident, but he just doesn't have the skill set to do it. He's not powerful like Ben Roethlisberger. He's not going to shed tackles, and he's not Russell Wilson. He's not going to be able to beat you with his athleticism and movement skills. So one of the things about all these changes on the rules on offense that have made it so much easier for the passing game, it's one of those things where the NFL, again, doesn't think ahead. And to every reaction, every action, there's a reaction. The reaction by defenses has been, you got to get to the quarterback or you're dead. And that means more blitzes. If you can't get there with a 4-man rush, you go to 5. If you can't get there with 5, you go to 6. But the one thing that is consistent in this league is you're not going to have a lot of time to sit back there and survey the situation. So you need to extend plays, and that's why so many people in this league look at Sam Bradford and say,
right,
he's not an upper-level quarterback.
And it's fair. I don't think anybody should make that assessment. He's not an upper-level player. Hasn't been. Does he have the talent to? Remains to be seen. I think this year will certainly give us more insight on who he is. And if some people have made their assessment on him, that's fair too. I don't think that's unfair to say, but I think this year will prove a lot of people to jump on one side of the fence or the other if you're still kind of on the middle. What about Marcus Smith? What's your take on him? Because here's a guy who was a first-round pick and literally has less than 10 tackles in 2 years, which is almost embarrassing. Can they get something from this kid? Has he been a story of camp at all, or does he just not have it?
No, well, I think he's going to make the team, and I said that, and I keep leaning on the fact that every time Jim Schwartz talks about him, he raves about his athleticism. I kind of compare it to Barkevious Mingo getting traded from the Browns to the Patriots. That guy was the 6th overall pick, and he did nothing for 3 years in Cleveland. And they tried to turn him into an inside linebacker. And I don't know if Mingo can play, but you're going to see this year because Bill Belichick is going to use him how he should use him, and that's as an edge pass rusher. Similar here, Marcus Smith, he wasn't a 3-4 linebacker. And then, if you remember his rookie season, they tried to move him inside for a while.
Terrible.
Which is just insanity.
Terrible.
The only trait he has of a first-round pick is his ability to go straight ahead, his speed around the edge, and his athleticism. And Jim Schwartz is going to take advantage of that. So either way, we're going to know by the end of the season if Marcus Smith can give you anything at the NFL level. If he doesn't do anything this year, he's a full-fledged bust. But I think Schwartz is going to use him correctly, and I think in his first 2 years, he was not used correctly.
John McMullen's with us at JF McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, and, of course, his national coverage at today'spigskin.com. San Diego, Bosa, whose side are you on?
That's a good one because both sides are crazy. But I've always said if you had to rate the levels of insanity, Joey Bosa wins that. Is just a little bit more insane. Because there's no end game. It's not necessarily fair. He doesn't have the leverage that the Chargers have. What's he going to do? If he sits out the entire year and re-enters the draft next year, there's no way he's going to be the 3rd pick overall. I think he's got enough talent that somebody will take a shot on him later in the first round. But say, for argument's sake, let's say he falls from number 3 to 15 or 20. He's probably going to lose $10 million just from doing that. And that doesn't make sense. So if you're Joey Bosa and you're that upset about the Chargers, what you got to do is sign your rookie contract, and then when the second one comes up, you hold them accountable. That means you either leave if you have the opportunity, or you hold their feet to the fire in a financial sense. That's when you take it out on the organization you're not happy with. At some point, he's got to look in the mirror and ask himself, do I want to be an NFL player or not? And if he wants to be an NFL player, he's got to play for the San Diego Chargers. It's as simple as that.
I remember talking to you about this, I forget which player, but offset language, stuff that's pretty common in the NFL. It seems like a pretty petty argument right here.
Well, it is. I've compared it to a married couple that hates each other so much they invent things to fight over.
Who was that last year with the offset language? Was that Mariota?
Yeah, it was. And the funny thing is, offset language can be very, very important for a third or a fourth round pick, somebody like that. For a top 5 pick, it's utterly meaningless. It's never going to come into play. There is no organization in this world that's going to take a kid at number 3 and cut them before their 4th year. Yeah. It's not going to happen. So the ability to double dip and go to another organization, which is essentially what offset language is, if you don't have it in your contract, you can double dip. They're not cutting them. Even if you're Jamarcus Russell.
Even if you're Marcus Smith.
Exactly.
Right.
The Eagles, but even if you go Bjorn Werner, if you remember him,
sure.
Florida State kid, he was in the 20s, and he got cut by Indianapolis before his 4th year. But again, Marcus Smith was in his 20s too. It's a possibility the Eagles could move on. So as you get down later in the draft, but if you're in the top 5, nobody has given up on you for 2 reasons. A, you have a ton of talent, and B, even if they're wrong, they don't want to admit their mistake. So it's just not going to come into the equation. And everybody knows it, and that's why it's so silly that they're fighting over that part of it. They're also fighting over the deferred nature of the signing bonus, which the Chargers wanted to put off 50% to next year. But now San Diego's offered to pay 85% right away, and that's more than the average of a typical first-round pick.
Real quick, I got about 30 seconds. In a word, should the Cowboys be worried with Romo?
Yeah, heck yeah. He's only played 16 games, I think, once in the last 4 years.
Well, that hit last night. I mean, I know they're downplaying it, but he got crumped. He went one way, the back went the other way. It didn't look good. I mean, at 37, I know how I'd feel if my back did that.
Exactly, and it's chronic. It's not going away, and I've said that all the time. If he's out there for 16 games, the Cowboys are in good shape in a bad division. If he's not, they're not in good shape, and it's very, very questionable to say a guy that old is going to be out there for 16 games. It's more likely than not that it's not going to happen.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, at JF McMullen, and check him out nationally at todayspigskin.com. Have a good one, John.
Hey, you too. Thanks, Mike.